our government uh, in independent India in 1947. So the starting point or the initial conditions is very important to note. At the time of independence, we had great expectations from the functioning of democracy. We thought, because of participation of the large sections of population throughout the country in the struggle for independence, we believed that democracy, once established in our country, the democratic setup will ensure the transformation of our society, which was obviously unequal at the time of independence. So the initial situation was the prevalence of socio-economic inequalities in the country. You could abolish princely rule of the princes in about 500 princely states, and also abolish Jagirdari Zamindari system at the dawn of independence itself. Barring this, the social structure, the caste system, the wealth inequalities and income inequalities were the same as were obtaining much before independence. The idea was, because of the widespread participation of the people in the struggle for independence, we should be able to democratize our social structure and also ensure, because of the changes in social structure, you should be able to ensure relative equality in incomes by abolishing poverty and reducing unemployment. But what actually happened was contrary to our expectations and contrary to what was stipulated in the Constitution itself. As Dr. Ambedkar, the architect of our Constitution, warned in the Constituent Assembly itself, he said, by adopting this Constitution, we are ushering in a democracy where formal empowerment of people politically is ensured, but we are doing this in a society which is ridden with great inequalities. So therefore, the challenge is to bring about the economic emancipation or reduction of inequalities and rising per capita incomes in a society within a social structure which is highly unequal. This is really the warning he put before us, the whole nation. And now we are seeing how prophetic he has been, Dr. Ambedkar has been, because there has been a steep rise in the income inequalities in the country, rise in unemployment, particularly after the introduction of economic reforms in the early 90s. Now for about 30 years, we have been experiencing, of course, a high rate of growth of economy, but also a significant rise in the inequalities in income. Now this is not just a phenomenon confined to India. This has been experienced throughout the world actually, after liberalization of economies and after the fall of communism in some of the countries, notably in Russia and other countries. So the emergence of new economies have been experiencing the rise in income inequalities. Today, according to a report of the United Nations, 2/3 of the world population lives in countries where income inequality has been rising. So this is a major problem. In fact, at the socio-economic level, it is the number one problem in the world. Now, how to really face this problem and try to reduce these inequalities. Now, as Prashant Bhushan ji mentioned, participatory development is the ultimate remedy for these problems. Now, whether we have been able to democratize our social structure, whether we have been able to ensure the participation of the hitherto neglected population like SCs, STs, BCs, and minorities and women in general. If you look at it from this angle, the participation of all the marginalized sections and sections which were not socially and politically empowered, their participation in decision making and in their implementation has been very poor. They have not been really encouraged to participate effectively. Because of shortage of time, I would like to only cite one example about our failure to ensure participation of people. I will take up the case of women's participation. You know, there has been a movement for the reservation of at least 1/3 of seats for women in parliament. Now, this has been going on for decades and we have not been able to achieve a consensus on this issue. But if you see the experience as to what exactly has happened regarding the participation of women in decision-making process, whether you take Lok Sabha or state legislatures. Now, all political parties, in principle, they seem to be in favor of reserving at least 1/3 of seats for women in elections to the Lok Sabha and state assemblies, even though some parties want further quota within this 1/3. But the actual experience is that the share of women elected has steadily increased from 4.5% of all elected people for the second Lok Sabha, that is 1957, to around 14% for the 13th Lok Sabha. This is established in 2019. While the number of women contesting as a proportion to the total number of candidates contesting was lower at 3% and 9% respectively in these two periods, indicating that the number of women contesting or winning is still well below 33%. Now, this is brought out by the Election Commission of India. I am quoting the figures from their figures. Now, at this pace of change, it may take around another 100 years for women to reach the 33% representation visualized. Now, it was open for each of the political parties in favor of reservation of 1/3 seats for women to aim at realizing this objective by fielding adequate number of women candidates and ensuring their election. Such a practice could have facilitated the passing of the Women's Reservation Bill by bringing about a consensus. For the second Lok Sabha, that is in 1957, the total number of women candidates fielded by all the national parties constituted only 4% of the total number of contestants fielded by them. The women candidates fielded by the Indian National Congress, the Communist Party of India, constituting 6% and 4% respectively. So for the 17th Lok Sabha, that's 2019, the number of women candidates fielded by the national parties increased to 12%, those by the All India Trinamool Congress by 33.7%. It is the highest number actually among all political parties. 15% with the BJP, Indian National Congress 13% each, CPI 18%, like this. Now if you look at the performance for the state assemblies together, the number of elected to the total number elected increased from 3.5% during the general elections held between 1974 to 1978 to 14.5% during the general elections held between 2016 and 2020, which means the pace of increase in the representation of women in state assemblies seems to be almost the same as their representation in the Lok Sabha. Now this is only one important illustration I wanted to give about the participation of our people, particularly those who are marginalized, disempowered socially in the polity. Now, the number of other indicators of inequality, rising inequalities, if you take poverty, of course it has been declining. The people below the poverty line as a proportion to total population has been declining, but at a very slow rate, particularly after the introduction of economic reforms. And now poverty is getting concentrated, especially among the marginalized sections like scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, backward classes, minorities, and women. So the social polarization has been increasing from this angle. So all this shows that the need for social change has become a major challenge in our country. Democracy, we thought, will help us to bring about social change in our country. But what is actually happening is the entrenched social structure, which has been there for thousands of years in our country, now it is that social structure which has been really influencing the functioning of democracy, perverting the functioning of democracy and facilitating the rise of the richer sections and appropriation of the rise in incomes in the hands of very few. So therefore there is a need to reform our democracy, as Prashant Bhushanji pointed out. There are a number of ways to do this. An obvious thing that he mentioned was the proportional representation system, which is in vogue in many of the European countries. That is one way of transforming our democracy in the right direction. And then greater representation for women, at least half, 33% of course has been accepted by all political parties, but in principle, at least half of the seats should be ensured for women in all decision-making bodies, particularly in parliament and state assemblies. And then, as he mentioned, the funding of elections. Public funding of elections is important, government funding of elections, and also, as he pointed out, it can be done by small collections from the rest of the voters also. So these are some of the ways which can discuss many other ways of strengthening democracy or democratizing our society. But how can this happen? As Prashant Bhushanji rightly pointed out, it has to come basically through social movements. We had such movements very sporadically, say anti-corruption agitation, which have been taking place occasionally with some positive results, but basically going back to the situation as it existed before the agitation started. So, public movements, people's movements, are very rare these days. We could find this movement for liberation, for independence earlier on a large scale. At that time there were some social movements, social transformation, social reform used to be a big objective for social movements at that time. But after independence, periodic elections and formation of governments, these have been a major activity for all enterprising political parties and the youth. But reforms for social change have not been a target subject of social movements in our country. There have been, of course, some very notable movements, like we remember Ella Bhattji passed away only yesterday. The women's self-help movement that she started was a great event. And then we have the other one for employment generation and wages, ensuring minimum wages, and for right to information, started by under the leadership of Aruna Roy. We have had certain great movements like this, successful movements. But despite these movements, the pressures required to really cleanse our democratic framework, make it really healthier, and really ensure the guarantees given in our constitution. Now, we have not been able to do that because of lack of those powerful movements. Now, the major interest for many of the those activists now seem to be politics only, periodic elections, formation of governments, changing from one party to another like this. But we don't hear much about movements, although we have, it seems now, around 3,000 NGOs operating in the country at the grassroots level. But we find very few cases I mentioned at the national level, which really are strong enough to transform the society or to make, to effect big changes in the society, whether it is employment and wages or social equality. We have very few movements going on. So how to really organize such movements and inspire people in this direction is a major question. Without such movements, it would be difficult to transform politics on healthy lines and ensure an equitable economic and social development. Thank you very much for this opportunity.